A few weeks ago, Dr. Michelle Bengtson was on our show, and she called and talked about mental health in young people using social media. Well, I went to her website, and it turns out she's written a book called Hope Prevails, Insights from a Doctor's Personal Journey Through Depression. And this year, she's releasing a book called Breaking Anxiety's Grip. She has agreed to join us here for Bell Let's Talk Day to share her story. Now, Dr. Michelle, thank you very much for being here. Let's start off by talking about how, as a doctor, I guess we don't think that doctors will get depression and go through these situations.
Well, and it's funny that you say that, because as a doctor, I thought, this shouldn't be happening to me. I have all the answers. But, doctors are not immune. Doctors get the flu and get cancer and get diabetes as well. But the interesting thing was that I was always a very compassionate doctor, but once I went through depression and really understood it from the patient side, it changed everything. And the interesting part, Wayne, is that I had been dealing with patients for about 20 years with various forms of mental illness, depression, anxiety, bipolar, just basic life stress, and I didn't even recognize it in myself when it first happened. The first time I experienced depression was postpartum depression after the birth of my first son. He was doing just fine. He was the perfect little baby, and I would be crying at the drop of the hat. Like a piece of paper would fly off the kitchen counter, and I would start crying and didn't recognize it for what it was. And so that's part of what I think is so crucial for us to understand is sometimes others will see it in us before we see it in ourselves. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, so what happened then with you? So you went through the postpartum depression. How did you come out of that?
It was my mother who recognized what it was. She had called from Florida. I was living in Texas, and she said, "Honey, how are you?" And I started to cry. And she said, "What's going on? What's wrong with the baby?" I said, "Nothing's wrong with the baby." And I explained to her what was going on. She said, "Honey, I think you're going through postpartum depression. I want you to hang up the phone with me and call your doctor." And I did. I called my doctor, and I got on medication, and I got over that. But several years later, just a tsunami of circumstances happened. My husband was diagnosed with cancer, and I was working crazy, crazy hours, and I started to experience the symptoms of depression again. Only that time I did recognize it for what it was. So I did those things that I would normally recommend to my patients. I got in with a counselor who I could be accountable to. I got on medication. I made sure I was eating right. I made sure that rest was a priority and that I would get at least 10 to 15 minutes of exercise. And over time, slowly, I came out of that. But what really came out of that was a much, much better appreciation for what it truly feels like when you're depressed. Mm-hmm. Because when you haven't gone through it, you really just don't understand. And you can mean really well, but say all the wrong things and do all the wrong things. And so now I try to educate not just my patients who are going through it, but their friends and family members as well.
Terrific. Well, you're going to be with us for Bell Let's Talk Day today, and you're going to come back, and we're going to dive more into what those symptoms look like, because do you think there's people that are suffering it that don't realize they are in it?
Oh, absolutely. The majority of my patients who come in with depression don't know that they're dealing with depression until we sit down and talk and I explain it to them. And then it's kind of like the blinders come off and they go, "Oh my gosh, there's a word for this. Now I feel better just knowing that it's just not all in my head."
Dr. Michelle Bengtson joining me today for Bell Let's Talk Day as we continue to talk about mental health and ending the stigma here with Easy Rock.